of you guys are going to Grace Bible Camp? So thrilled! I might see you there. If you are going, we might bump into each other. Who knows? How many of you are packed for Grace Bible Camp? How many of you have been packed for more than one day? How many of you have been packed for more than 1 week? Oh man, some of y'all are really ready to go. That's excellent. I am not packed at all. I have not packed anything yet. But that's what today is for. I might pack tomorrow morning. We'll find out. I might just show up and just wear the same shirt all week. Who knows? I'd smell just as bad as that stink bomb going off. Okay, so we are talking about lesser-known stories of David, and I want to talk to you guys today in thinking about how we don't have to seek revenge. This is the theme we're going with today. I want to talk to you guys actually about pirate words. Arr, yeah, you hear pirate words. Actually, that makes me think of a joke. What is a pirate's favorite letter? Nay, the landlubbers, 'tis the sea which is the pirate's favorite. Get it? I'm glad you know that joke. Some people didn't get it. That's okay. You'll think about it. You'll come to you later. You'll be eating lunch and going, oh, the sea! I get it. You'll put it later if you don't understand. Okay, so I want to talk to you guys about pirate words. And I call them pirate words, yes, because the words I'm going to talk to you about today all do start with the letter R. So you can make a little pirate book here for me. And everybody go, R. Excellent. Thank you. Put your pirate book away. We don't want to put an eye out or something. Then we'd have to get out the eye patches. So, in thinking about pirate words, the first word I want to introduce to you is resentir. It's a funky kind of word. It means to feel deeply. It is an old French word, which is why you probably never heard of it. It's an old French word, and it means to feel deeply. Let me try and break it down for you. There are two parts to it. You have the R-E right here. That part of the word means to feel with, it means intense force. Intense force. The second part here, the sentir, means to feel. So when you put them together, you feel with intense force. Now see, I could say intense in different ways. I could say, oh, intense, or I could say, intense! You see how much different that is, of the emotion that goes into that? Resentir means to feel deeply, to feel with intense force. Now that's an old French word. The second pirate word is to resent. That's an English word. This English word comes from the French word resentir. Now, to resent means to feel bitter. It's still that feeling, but it's bitterness. It's usually stemming out of anger. So these two words together, those are very negative words. Very not good words. But they both talk about feeling. Feeling very deeply. If something has ever upset you before, and you just kind of have it sit there and it's always on your brain, you're like, oh, I can't get over that sort of thing. That's resentir. That's like you're feeling something so deeply, it's just sitting there rolling through your mind, going back and forth from one side to the other. It's just dominating your brain. That's feeling deeply. Because then that emotion, because when you think about it, your anger just builds up. And you can't even talk words good or anything. You're just over here because you're so angry. Those are negative words. Now, resentment can come from a couple different things. In looking at this other word here, resent, to resent, resentment, feeling bitter. This can come from a couple different things. An example would be if you are insulted by something or by someone. So like when somebody calls you names or something like that. That can make you feel resentment because you'll be thinking about how that person called you names. Another example could be where somebody has exposed or revealed something that you were trying to keep hidden. One example could be, let's say that you were trying to throw a party for somebody. Or here, even better. You bought something special for, let's say, your dad. You bought something special for your dad. And you told your brother or sister, now I bought this for Dad. We wrapped it all up. We got it in this bag, in this packaging here, and we're going to set it on his bed, so when he comes home, he'll go into the bedroom, he'll see it on the bed and go, what is that? He'll open it up and we'll be surprised by this awesome thing, so we can't tell him because it has to be a surprise. And then your dad gets home from work, he walks in the door, comes in, hey guys, how's it going? And your brother or sister says, guess what, Dad? There's a surprise on the bed and it's this, and they bought it for you. And you're standing there going, what did I tell you? I said not to. It was a surprise. It's something you were trying to keep hidden. And you can remember how that happened, what your sibling did. They spoiled the surprise. It was something you were trying to keep hidden. And you can think about that a lot, and you can feel bitter. You can feel resentment. You can feel anger towards your brother or sister because they spoiled the surprise. Or maybe there's something you're trying to hide from other people, something you don't want other people to know. There are not good secrets either. And sometimes it's good for those secrets to be known by other people, but if we're not careful, we can let that sit in our mind, and every time we think about that, we can get angry and we can feel bitter. So those are our two-part words there. Now, what does that have to do with our story today? What does that have to do with King David and some of those lesser stories you may not have even heard of before? Well, I'm glad you asked. Let me tell you about it. So, there was a time for King David. There was a time where one of his sons, his own son, decided he wanted to be king instead. And he had a plan. He was going to kill his own father, King David. He was going to kill King David, he was going to take the throne, and he was going to rule in his place. His own son. That's kind of sad. So, it's kind of like a pirate mutiny, since we're talking about pirates. If you know, like, you've got a pirate ship sailing on the sea, and there's a captain in charge of the ship, and you have all his sailors underneath him and everything. He usually has a first mate and whatnot. Sometimes the sailors, the pirates, don't like the way the captain is running the ship. And they say, we think we can do better. We're going to mutiny and overthrow the captain, so he's not going to be the captain anymore, and we're going to make somebody else the captain instead. It's kind of like what his son was doing. His son's name is Absalom, by the way. Absalom wanted to kind of have a mutiny against his father. He wanted to kill his dad, get rid of him, take over, and be the king instead. And he did it in a very sneaky way, too. It wasn't really good. So King David and a lot of his mighty men and a lot of the servants, they had to flee Jerusalem in order to save their lives. They had to run. They had to leave. So they go, if Jerusalem is right here, a little bit north and east of that is this little place called Bahurim. It's this little town, just a little bit northeast of that. And so they go to that town, it's like a quick little stop, and then they're going to continue running for their lives. And while they're running there, they come across this interesting person. And this person does something.
You are so weird. What is your problem? Go away. I don't like you.
So that happened. Now, what Pastor Mike just helped me with there is exactly what this gentleman did to King David. Usually when the king goes by, people would be like, oh, it's the king. They would bow to the king as they go by, or queen, I guess, in that case. But if when the king passes by, they would bow to the king, oh, my liege, it was good to see you, things like that. Instead, Shimei, I don't even know if I'm pronouncing his name correctly, but that's how I'm going to say it from now on. So Shimei, he sees King David, and what he does is he throws rocks at him. He's throwing rocks at the king of Israel. What? He's throwing rocks at the king of Israel. Not only that, he's cursing him. He's saying, you are a worthless man. You're a man of blood. You know what? The Lord has caused your son to try and kill you to be king instead. The Lord has caused this to happen. You are a terrible person. And he's throwing rocks at King David the whole time. That is not something you do to the king. I might be wrong, but I'm pretty sure that's not something you do to the king. Now, according to Jewish law, if you curse God, if you curse the king, or if you cursed your parents, all three of those were punishable by death. If you did any one of those, cursing your parents, cursing God, or cursing the king. And in this case, Shimei is cursing the king. But he's not just cursing him, he's calling him names, and he's throwing rocks at him. So, Think about this for a second. If you know anything about King David, you know that King David is a warrior. He is a soldier. He is not just any warrior or soldier. He is a very seasoned, experienced, legendary soldier. Not just King David. Remember, traveling with him are a bunch of his mighty men. These are legends. Some of the most elite soldiers Israel has ever seen before. They're all traveling in a group, and one guy is throwing rocks at the king. Do you think this guy's going to be able to defend himself from King David and his mighty men? I don't think so. No way, Jose. So, Shimei, though, he knows what the law is. He knows that he can be put to death for cursing the king. He's also throwing stones at the king, and he knows that the mighty men are there. But he's still throwing stones, and he's still cursing. That doesn't stop him. He knows what the punishment is, and that doesn't stop him. I find that really interesting. But what's even more interesting is how David responded. David knows what the law is. David knows the punishment is death. But David does something else. His mighty men say, King David, we're going to go kill this guy and make him stop throwing rocks. And David says, no, let him. Let him throw rocks. Let him continue cursing. Let him continue calling me names. I'm pretty sure that if somebody was throwing rocks at me, like Pastor Mike was throwing fake paper rocks, I would not say, let him keep throwing rocks. I would not say, let him keep yelling at me. I would not say, let him keep cursing me. I would not respond that way. But King David does. And that's interesting to me. Why does he do that? Oh yeah, I forgot. I had a picture. This is kind of a representation of what's happening. This is Shimei over here, and he's chucking rocks at King David, and the soldiers are over here like, we're going to kill him! And David says, no, put his hand out here. No, let him continue. That's interesting. What's interesting here as well is that, here's the map now, Jerusalem is right here. Bahurim, that little town, is right here. David and his people are traveling along this line all the way to the Jordan River. And this is like as far as we're going to go for our story here today. They just get to the other side of the Jordan River here. From here in Jerusalem to way up here on the other side of the Jordan River is 21 miles. 21 miles, that's a lot of miles. It's kind of a low number, I guess, compared to other numbers we have, but it's a lot when you're talking about walking. Now the Bible says that Shimei continues following David and his men. He continues throwing rocks, he continues cursing and yelling the whole way. I don't know if he actually went the full 21 miles yelling and stuff, or maybe he just went a little ways away and then turned back. The Bible doesn't tell us. But the Bible says he continued. While David's going on one side of the road there, Shimei's on the other side, throwing rocks at him and yelling the whole way. That's a lot of yelling. I think I'd be tired after a little while. This guy was mad. He was really mad. He's kicking up dust at him. He's throwing rocks. He's calling him names. Think about how David felt. I want you to think for a second. Close your eyes and just think for a moment. How do you think David felt? Think about this. Your own son has tried to kill you. You've had to leave your home. You've had to run away on this long journey, all while this crazy guy is cursing you and throwing stones. If I were David, I would feel pretty crummy. I would feel pretty terrible. Now this journey, because it's 21 miles, that probably took maybe 10 or 12 hours of travel time. That's half a day. That's a long time. I would feel pretty tired after that. And if Shimei is throwing rocks at me the whole way, I'd be really, really downtrodden. I would feel a little depressed. This guy is just going on and on and on. In fact, I would probably feel a little, what's the French word? Resentier, or resentment. I would feel pretty deeply about that. I would feel a little bit bitter. If you got your Bibles, we're going to go ahead and look it up. We're going to look at what Jesus says about resentment. So if you got to go to Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 to 39. give you about 15 more seconds. Oh yeah, the trees are in the way, I'm sorry. There, let me help. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alright, let's zip eyes this way. Let's read here together. Matthew chapter 5, verses 38 and 39. Says this, "You have heard that it was said, an eye for an eye, and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. But if anyone slaps you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also." Now this is Jesus speaking. This is part of his Sermon on the Mount. This is Jesus talking, and he's actually quoting this first bit here where he says, you have heard it was said an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. He's actually quoting God. God said this in the Old Testament when he was giving the law to the people of Israel. Now, when God was saying this phrase, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, was actually more for like Israelites judges. God was saying, I want you as a judge of Israel to make sure that any punishment is fair and equal to the crime that was committed. So, if you did something that made somebody lose an eye, you don't get killed for that. Or if you do something that makes somebody lose a tooth, you don't like lose your house and everything you own for it. That's not fair punishment for what was done. So this is God saying that. You may have heard the phrase, let the punishment fit the crime. This is actually kind of adapted from that. An eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Whatever is done, the punishment should be something kind of similar. Not something greater, not something less, it should be something equal to it. Now Jesus, though, continues, and in orange here he says, but I say to you, do not resist the one who is evil. If somebody slaps you on the right cheek, turn to them the other cheek as well. So Jesus is saying something different. He is not overruling what God is saying. He's not saying God was wrong when he said this. But Jesus is saying something else. He is stressing a very important point, that showing grace to people is important, even if showing grace isn't deserved. Go ahead and close your Bibles now. So Jesus is saying, do not resist. What does it mean to resist? Here's our third word. Resist. To try and prevent. To try and keep something from happening. That's what it means to resist. When David was getting rocks thrown at him, he didn't try to resist. He didn't try to yell back, hey, you should stop that. That hurts, man. He didn't do that. Our next prior word here is retaliate or revenge. These words can be used interchangeably. To retaliate or to show revenge is to get back at somebody. David didn't resist what was happening. He didn't retaliate. He didn't seek revenge. He also kept his soldiers from retaliating, from trying to get back at Shimei for what was going on. He even kept his own soldiers from doing that. That's really interesting to me. David actually says this. He tells his soldiers, because they're like, King David, why can't we go kill this guy? He's throwing rocks at you, he's cursing, he's breaking the law, this is the punishment, we need to go do it. That just sounds pretty frustrating to me. David says, leave him alone, let him curse. It may be that the Lord will look at the wrong that has been done to me, and that the Lord will repay me with good for his cursing that was done today. David realizes that God sent Shimei for a reason. Now, God may not have looked at Shimei and said, yo, Shimei, I want you to go get some rocks, and I want you to go to King David, I want you to throw the rocks at him, and I want you to yell curses at him and call him names. Pretty sure God didn't do that. But God knew that Shimei wanted to do that Shimei was going to do that, and God allowed it to happen. Because David knows that God is sovereign. God is in control. And if this is happening, it must be for a reason. David knows he has to respond in the way that God would want him to. David is only in control of how he responds. He can't change Shimei's mind on anything. He can try to talk to him about it. He can't force him to change his mind, even though he's the king. David knows, you know what? I have to choose how I'm going to respond to what's happening to me today. So, thinking about these words, feeling deeply in bitterness with resentment, resisting, getting revenge, getting back at people. All of these words kind of go into this story, and there are actually 3 things we can learn from this story from King David. The first one is this: do not respond with resentment. When something happens to us, when we are being wronged, like if somebody were to throw stuff at us or call us names, or if something is being done where we feel insulted, where we feel attacked, where we feel like somebody has done something wrong to us, we should not respond if we are feeling resentment, if we feel bitter. If we know that every time we think about what was done, we start to get angry, we shouldn't respond when we're feeling that way. Because resentment, bitterness, is an emotion. And when you're feeling a lot of deep, intense emotion like that, you usually don't respond in a good way. You really don't. Our emotions can have a habit of taking over our clear thinking sometimes. And we don't always make good choices when we're feeling very deep emotion like that. In fact, if we are to respond against somebody while we're feeling resentment, instead of responding in a way that is equal, because of how angry we feel, we usually try to do something worse than what was done to us. If somebody's throwing rocks at me, I'm going to throw twice as many rocks back at them. That's what emotion makes us do when we react with resentment and bitterness. So we should not respond that way, because we will try to do something worse, and that's not what God's word said we should do. Second lesson is this: revenge is for God, not for me. God actually said this in the Old Testament when he's talking to the people of Israel. He says, vengeance or revenge is mine. This is God talking. Revenge is mine, I will repay, says God. So when things happen to us, God is the one who will repay and respond to that. That is not our job, to get back at somebody, to get revenge, to get justice for things like that. That's God's job, not ours. Even though he was the king, David knew that God was the judge. And you know what? If you think about it, David actually knew this with King Saul as well. If you remember that story where King Saul is trying to kill not King David, yeah. When he's trying to kill David, and David's hiding in the back of that cave, and Saul comes in, and David cuts off a piece of his robe there like that, and he comes out to him later saying, look what I could have done, I could have killed you. David knew that God will judge all people. He knew that it was not his job to get revenge against King Saul. Just like David knew, I shouldn't try and get revenge against Shimei, because that's God's job, not mine. Our last word is restore. This is a positive word. To restore means to fix what was broken. David actually tried to restore a relationship with Shimei later. After all the stuff was done with his son trying to take over the kingdom and everything, and David crosses back over the Jordan River, Shimei is one of the first people there to greet him. In fact, the Bible says Shimei was running to meet King David. And in the old Bible times like that, for a man, a Jewish man, to run was not something that was done. It was not proper. You don't do that. So to do that shows that there was something so important that Shimei had to do. He didn't care what he looked like. He was going to run to see the king. And in fact, there were 1,000 men from his own tribe following with him. And he gets to King David, and he falls on his face in front of him. And he begs King David to forgive him, because he realized he had done something wrong. Now, King David had a choice. He could have said, oh, I'm the king again. Yeah, that's right. You better be scared. You better get on your face and beg for forgiveness. That's right. Oh, you scared now. What you gonna do about it? I'm the king and I can do whatever I want. David didn't do that. David chose to restore the relationship, and he chose to forgive Shimei. He chose to forgive him for that. And that's the third lesson that we can learn from King David. First, do not respond with resentment. Don't respond to what's being done out of bitterness or anger. Don't seek revenge, because revenge is something for God, not for us. And third, if we have the chance, we should always look for the chance. We need to try and restore the relationship with that person and try and make it right, as King David did with Shimei. Now, in thinking about this though, This is actually a lot like what God has done for us. Now, each one of us has sinned. Each one of us has done something wrong. And every single time we sin, it's kind of like Shimei, throwing rocks and yelling curses. Only instead of doing that to King David, that's us doing that to God. Every time we sin, it's like cursing God's name and throwing stones at him and kicking up dust and stuff like that. And how has God chosen to respond? God chose to respond with grace. God chose to respond and say, you know what? I know that you've sinned against me and that you've disobeyed, but I'm going to send my son Jesus to take the punishment for your sin anyways. And God continually seeks to restore a relationship with us, even while we sin. That's incredible. That's something amazing. And because that is something that God has done for us, that is something that we should seek to do with other people as well. And when somebody has done wrong against us, to not respond in anger or bitterness, but to recognize that, you know what, I need to cool off and remember that God's in control, and revenge is for God, not for me. And I need to seek to try and make things better with this person and restore that relationship. Go ahead and bow your heads and close your eyes for me now. Jesus, thank you for this day. We thank you for the chance to be here in Blastone and to learn more about you and to be challenged by the lesson from King David, this story that often gets overlooked. I pray that when somebody has done something wrong against any of us here, that we will not think about those feelings, that we will not let that emotion overtake our brains, but that you will help us to calm down, to think a little clearly, and to remember that to respond in that way is wrong. That we should not seek revenge against other people, but we should seek to restore those relationships and to show people grace. Even if people don't want to fix the relationship, we need to keep showing grace to them and keep showing forgiveness, just like you have always done for us. We thank you and we praise you in Jesus' name. Amen. It's time for Shotgun.